Welcome to The Collective, where every conversation ignites a new perspective. Join us as we delve into the journeys of remarkable individuals, explore the art of growth, resilience, and the power of a shared mission as we strive to be better together. Hey everybody, welcome back to The Collective. We have a very interesting show today, and I am excited to get this started. Now, while I'm excited, you should be too. Like the show, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bells, do all that good stuff, get your emails when we go live, which of course, Fridays for The Collective, Wednesdays for The Gold Mine. I cannot wait to dive right into this, but we got Alana here, we got Doug here, we got Sean here. This is a subject both Sean and I were discussing how little we know about, so we're pumped to learn from you guys as well. And let's dive right into it. Alana, give us a quick little rundown, 10 to 15 seconds, and then we can carry on.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yep, all good.
Okay, good. I'm just driving through a black spot, but yeah, Alana Stott, I've been on before a few times. I guess what am I? I'm pretty knowledgeable on human trafficking. I don't like to say the word expert, but been working in the area for about 24 years. I work mainly in OSINT world now, so open source intelligence, and in the preventative and education space around trafficking.
Yeah. I cannot wait to hear your very wise opinion on all of this. Doug, how about yourself?
Yeah, hey team. Doug Patteson, I've been on before as well. I'm a former CIA officer, and I've spent a fair amount of time on security issues ranging from counterterrorism to counter-narcotics and traditional targets over the years, thinking a lot about kind of networks and clandestine operations and how they get used by various criminal groups, organized crime, et cetera, particularly in today's kind of digitized age. So fun to be looking at this in a different way. I'm looking forward to learning a lot from the rest of the folks here.
Yeah, this is going to be amazing. Sean, how's life treating with all those notes in the mountains?
Yeah, I did make some notes for this show because, quite frankly, I'm pretty much almost illiterate in the subject. I've got maybe 12, 15 pages of notes. I've just spent maybe 10 hours over the last three days of digging deeper into the topic. And thank you to Alana for pushing this topic that we're going to dig into, asking us to some degree enter into the conversation because it's a sorely needed conversation. And hopefully over the next couple of hours, we'll dig into subjects that I'm completely unaware of. And that probably means that most of our listeners are unaware of as well. It's a massive, complex, multi-country, quite frankly, global problem that has been ongoing for not just years or decades, but centuries, of course. But what has caught my eye the most, I suppose, is the quite recent phenomenon, specifically in Myanmar, Laos, and Cambodia, the scam factories that kicked off in 2021, 2022, that have now got to such a degree where it is a major concern for transnational crime and the proliferation of the new digital form of human trafficking and exploitation. So that's where my head is at right now. I'm really looking forward to learning a lot in this conversation.
Yeah, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you pushing this forward, Alana. This is just fantastic that it definitely pushed our boundaries to begin with when I had to think about whether we wanted to bring it on to the show. So this is fantastic. But I think right off the bat, what I'd like to get from you guys is a definition. Human trafficking there's so many realms we can go down to, but let's just start at the very beginning here and define human trafficking. Doug, let's hit you first.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, right? Because the definition gets to the core of having to define having to let you begin to tackle the scope of the problem. But, it's the coercion of individuals into either forced labor or various forms of sex trafficking against their will. Alana's probably got a better, more robust definition for it than that, but that's how I have tackled the problem.
Well, let's hit it. Alana, let's see if you can hear us. Hopefully you're a bit frozen there. She might be transferred to her office right now. Well, let's come back to her here. What do you got, Sean?
So just a brief historical context right off of my notes here. So while slavery and exploitation are ancient practices, modern human trafficking is a distinct crime defined by international law and driven by criminal enterprises. That marks a shift from historical state-sanctioned forms of slavery to a more correct clandestine, profit-driven criminal activity. And so defining human trafficking can be maybe best done by what is called the Palermo Protocol. And that is the United Nations protocol to prevent, suppress, and punish trafficking in persons, especially women and children. It was adopted in 2000, known as the Palermo Protocol, and it provides the internationally accepted definition. And the key components of the definition are as such: the AMP model, which stands for act, means, and purpose. Mm-hmm. The act, first of all, is the action taken by traffickers, which includes the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of persons. So that's the A. The M part is the means. And so by the means, this is the element that describes how traffickers exert control. It includes the threat or use of force, coercion, abduction, fraud, deception, the abuse of power or of a person of vulnerability, or the giving or receiving of payments or benefits to achieve the consent of a person having control over another person. So that's the A and the M. Now the last piece is P within the model, the purpose. This element outlines the trafficker's goal. The purpose is exploitation, which includes, at a minimum, the exploitation or the prostitution of others or other forms of sexual exploitation, forced labor or services, slavery or practices similar to slavery, servitude, or the removal of organs. And so that's a lot, of course, the Palermo Protocol. It covers a lot of terrain, but the protocol as it is, or the definition as it is just a loose framework of words that are attempting to cover, again, a massive, global, complex, deep problem that is, generally speaking, criminally related.
Yeah. Alana, you got anything to add to the definition of human trafficking?
Yeah, I think that it's always very interesting when we talk about AMP and forced fraud coercion, because then it comes down to, well, what does all that mean? Like, what actually is coercion? How do you define coercion? How do you know what coercion is? And that's probably one of the areas that I focus on most at the minute. Right now, it's very easy to look at what human trafficking is and watch the movies and be like, oh, kidnapping in the back of a van, and force meaning like we're making you do something you don't want to do. I think most of the movies have that kind of highlighted about how, we'll tie the hands behind the back, kidnap you, force you, tell you we're going to kill their family, all this kind of action. And while I'm not saying that doesn't happen, it's not the norm. And as you say, it's been around forever. Since we've had people, we've had slaves. So it's evolved. And I think that one of the most difficult things is that we don't keep up with the evolution of the trafficker. And the traffickers right now, it's very, very difficult to spot a trafficked person anymore, because the coercion and the manipulation and everything that happens before the trafficking is the most important part now. So finding their victims, securing their trust, satisfying needs, secluding them, isolating them from their family, normalizing sexualization, all this kind of stuff happens, and none of that part's illegal. All of this part before the person's trafficked, but unfortunately, once we've got them into that almost like Stockholm syndrome type mindset, where they're thinking that they love this person or they'll do anything for this person, to then try and get them to understand that they're being exploited is one of the hardest jobs that law enforcement have got at the moment. First of all, understanding it and what it looks like, and then getting that person to understand that they're being trafficked and that this isn't something that they should be doing. It's such a difficult process to understand for everyone involved, that the traffickers are just getting away with it freely now. And then with the rise of digital trafficking, it's even harder. So it's a huge crime that's getting bigger and bigger. I think, and Doug, you might know more, I think we're coming up to 55 million now, a $250 billion a year industry that's just, they're getting wiser and we're not keeping up at all.
This is like Sean was saying at the beginning, this is a very needed subject because most of these statistics probably many don't know. Doug, you got any thoughts on what Alana just dropped there?
No, I think it's great. I think I wanted to come back to one brief thing at the beginning, though, about when I've talked to people about trafficking, one of the misconceptions that I hear from them is they think about it in terms of human smuggling, and we're talking about human smuggling as a different problem set than trafficking, right? It's not about transport, right? It's about coercion of people to engage in these activities on a legal basis. And so I think it's important to separate out that problem set as a totally separate problem set to deal with. And I think most of the definitions do a good job of that. And as Alana said, so much of what people's impressions are driven by is driven by, what they've seen in entertainment or in the media on it. And I think there's a huge education effort needed to bring folks into understanding what does it look like today versus what did it look like in 2005.
I'm wondering how much the culture of extremities in the Western world right now, all of our media is driven towards the extreme. Everything has got to be bigger, better, faster, stronger, or worse, or more depraved. Like if you look at the evolution of let's say horror movies over the last 20, 30 years, everything gets that much more extreme. And I think in the media, especially, I think that could have quite a bit to do with it. Sean, you got any thoughts?
I do. So as Doug said, and Alana said, the aspect of trafficking doesn't require movement. The term trafficking doesn't require you to move across an international border. It doesn't require you to move to another city. You can be trafficked right within your own neighborhood. And so the term trafficking is a bit of a misnomer in our modern society now, specifically when we start talking about digital human trafficking, which perhaps we'll get into a bit later into the podcast. For now, what I'd like to establish for any of the listeners is perhaps some of the various forms of human trafficking. Just some loose terms we'll throw out there. I won't dive into them too deep, but if we need to dive into them, we can also do that. So here's some major forms of human trafficking. Of course, the obvious one, it's already been generally referenced, and that is sex trafficking. And I won't go into the definitions or what the victims look like or what the common recruitment tactics are. I'm just going to list off the sort of major forms. So we've got sex trafficking. You've got forced labor, you've got forced criminality, you have child soldiers, you have forced marriage, you have organ trafficking, and you have familial exploitation. And so there's many drivers and many vulnerabilities there that we could talk about, how this happens, how it's easily taken advantage of, or where the cracks in the system are that are being exploited, et cetera. Perhaps we'll get into that later. And also there's a variety of different reasons that traffickers are motivated to choose a specific form of human trafficking. And that sort of trafficker's motivation is to some degree driven by the ease of trafficking within their political or geopolitical location. So as an example, here in North America, human trafficking or trafficking as a whole is done differently than in Southeast Asia, which is done differently than in Eritrea, which is done differently in et cetera, et cetera. And to some degree, if we want to use kind of some broad generalizations, looking at perhaps some of I'll loosely frame it as the worst human trafficker countries in the world, we could talk about, as an example, North Korea. It isn't considered as like, well, they're not it's not sexploitation, or it's not falling into the typical pattern of human trafficking. But what we have is an entire country that's locked down in forced labor, in generally slavery, and all kinds of other subcategories of human trafficking. But it isn't considered as a country that is human trafficking. Eritrea, as an example, isn't on the radar for human trafficking, but generally speaking, the country as a whole is locked down into such a controlled population that most of the population is in forced servitude for decades. And so we could talk about China. We could talk about lots of countries that wouldn't be loosely termed as they're deep into human trafficking, because, again, human trafficking, I think, certainly in North America, is being siloed into these tiny little boxes or little cubicles of, well, human trafficking is all about that. But again, I'm stating the obvious now, I think, that human trafficking is a very broad, very complex, very deep subject that hopefully over the next 2 hours we'll dig into.
Yeah. Let's dive into it. Alana, you got any thoughts on what Sean just dropped out?
Yeah, and then I think it also one of the things that I often talk to people about, because, as I say, this is a subject I'm really passionate about. I've been passionate about for a long time, but it's something that maybe other people might not really care about, or they don't think it's affecting them, or they don't think it's a problem in their areas. So I always go to, as an example, some people will say, well, it's more for third world countries or impoverished areas, or it's to do with socioeconomic backgrounds. And that's one of the, I guess, biggest misconceptions. It literally can happen to anybody, anywhere, anytime. Different areas have, there's places like Bangladesh, for example, there's a lot more labor trafficking going on, and there's a lot more exploitation going on in those areas because of fast fashion, for example, might be something there. But how it affects the world, if you're not concerned about human trafficking, what it funds might be more concerned. Trafficking funds war, it funds terrorism, climate change, pretty much every problem that you can think of that's going on in the world, trafficking has a part of it, whether it be the funding, whether it be, things like fast fashion, is the climate change. So being able to understand it as a whole, that it isn't just, okay, let's just stop sex trafficking, or any trafficking, it's a supply and demand issue. And as the demands are getting larger, as you said, Chance, we're in a new world now where they want everything, they want it now, they want it bigger, they want it better. So whether that's clothes, whether that's sex, whether that's organs, whether that's whatever it might be, people think they have this entitlement of that instantly. They want it now. So we have to get that supply somewhere. And it's a lot easier to traffic people than it is to, for example, sell drugs. So people will go into this because it's a less risky way of it's a less risky crime, I guess. So you find more people doing that. And it is just, even in the poverty areas, yes, the people are more vulnerable to trafficking, but people are also more vulnerable to becoming traffickers, child soldiers, these types of things. And it's, as I say, it's ever evolving. I mean, even things like we're now starting to see cases of stem cell trafficking and fetuses and things like that. There's a huge demand for stem cell therapy right now. So where are we getting that from? And a lot of it can just be about awareness and asking those questions, and where's the supply coming from? And it's an interesting conversation I have a lot of the times with military guys, just because I'll talk to them more, and I'll say, like, have you ever paid for sex? And in an honest answer, they could tell me yes or no. And if it's a yes, I'll say, have you ever paid for a trafficking victim? And they'll say, absolutely not. We'd never do that. And I said, well, how do you know? Well, surely she would tell me, or surely I would know, or surely I would see. And it's like, it is impossible to know. So yeah, I have got zero. If somebody wants to do whatever they want to do with their own body, that is their choice. But it is impossible to tell the difference between somebody doing it because they want to and somebody doing it because they're being forced to. So it's just that awareness there. And if you don't care about trafficking, I bet you there's something that you do care about that it is affecting.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic point. Doug, you got something?
I mean, I have lots of thoughts swirling, but I want to come back to a little bit of something that Sean talked about. About 5 years ago, the U.S. government, the State Department, started tracking country-specific or government-specific, I should say, trafficking, right? And they've identified 13 nations that are actively engaged in trafficking, and they measure them every year on how, what's going on. And Eritrea is one of them on there. So at least in the national security environment, it is being paid attention to, maybe belatedly, but it is being paid attention to now as an ongoing issue where you have foreign governments engaged in it, and it's not mom and pop shops, it's not organized crime from Russia just that's doing it. It's now at a government scale, and the usual suspects that you would expect on there are there with China and Russia and Afghanistan, but it is Eritrea, it's Turkmenistan, it's North Korea, Cuba. Cuba's right in our backyard and is actively engaged in trafficking of victims. The scope of the problem is massive from an economic perspective. It's a $240 to $250 billion a year enterprise, right? There's a lot of people's vested economic interests that want to be protected. And so trying to figure out how do you begin to tackle everything from the mom and pop to the government scale thing, I think is an incredibly challenging aspect. And when you add into how the mechanisms have changed, as Alana so aptly pointed out, from into those digitized models, as well as the new technologies like stem cells and others that are being trafficked.
I have this, I have a little thought I just want to touch on beforehand is Dan C jumped in here. He said, working the streets as long as I did, the number of vulnerable girls, women, and men I've tried to help whose stories I've listened breaks my heart still to this day, a decade past retirement. And to Alana's point is that it's not only the victims themselves that are affected by it, but it's the first responders, it's the people that are trying to help them that are still affected by it long after that. Like, it applies to so much. And I'm wondering, just at as a root level here, of to be able to traffic in another person, people have to kind of become a commodity at that point. They're no longer other people. They're just a thing to be bought and sold and traded and so on and so forth. I'm wondering how much that has to do with it. Sean, I'm going to come to you on this. What do you think?
So one of the things that I hadn't considered up until I started this, last 10 hours of research on the topic specifically, and I mean very specifically, is the distinction between human trafficking, drug trafficking, and weapons trafficking. The interesting delineation is this, that human trafficking is a renewable resource, or it can be constantly used. Unlike drugs, if you buy a bag of whatever and you use that drug, the drug is gone. But the human is there the next day. And so every day, the human is there to be exploited for the rest of their life to some degree. And so that distinction between resources or exploitation of resources, drugs, weapons, humans are the commodity that just keeps on giving. And that's where the profit model is so enticing to a lot of criminal organizations, a lot of warlords, a lot of, nefarious parties that are seeing the economic scale, the advantage to it, and are simply using humans as profit centers. And so it is problematic, of course, because the scale of abuse now is kind of going like this. It's increasing in a form of magnitude that is disturbing, given that now criminal organizations are seeing the profit margin involved in the current digital human trafficking. So it is a massive current problem.
Yeah. Alana, you got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's interesting. We've done so much work, and for I've got some friends who've been in this work for 50 plus years, and it just keeps getting worse. And it's how much money can we spend on this? How much can we, what can we do that's going to make this? And it's really a it's working on a collaborative effort that nobody wants to do or nobody's willing to do. And this is always something that I speak about anyway, no matter what we're doing. And it could be anything that we're doing. When we don't collaborate, it's not going to work. And if I just take, for example, Orange County, where I'm here, and it's very different to for the UK, for example, we've got in Scotland, we have one police force. They can do the whole of Scotland. I'm in Orange County. We've got the Orange County Sheriff's Department. Cities have got their individual PDs. You've got FBI. You've got Homeland Security. You've got all these different entities. And then a lot of things are farmed out to NGOs. So victim support, all these different types of areas. So when you can't get them to work together. So, for example, Orange County struggle with San Diego or LA. We're not talking about, as you said, it's not about crossing countries. Sometimes it's just crossing a county line or crossing a city line, and the traffickers are free to work because these people won't work together. So put that into a more global scale. Yeah, I think Mauritania was the last country to say, yeah, we'll make slavery illegal in 2007. That's great, but they've still not done one conviction for it. I think the stats right now are for every 10,000 trafficking victim, there'll be one conviction. So there's nothing actually happening. There's nothing changing. And as you've said there, the digital trafficking that's now taken over on the profit scale, we're always going to look for how can we make more money? How can we make more money faster? So, digital trafficking and webcam or OnlyFans, these types of things are making people a lot of money very fast. And there's actually, there's people out there training other people how to do it and training people how to be better at abusing people and exploiting people. And that's freely allowed on the kind of free speech angle. Because the other thing they'll do is they'll tie themselves to a political element. So somebody could be out there talking about, this is how you get girls to do things. This is how you groom. Basically, this is 101 of grooming. And then we'll get all these people paying for a course, teaching all these other people how to groom. And there's nothing being done about it because maybe that person says something that's aligned to somebody else's political view. And we've just made it into a political movement. So the whole time, all these, 55 million people are being exploited and that number's growing. I mean, I think I maybe done a few things 5-6 years ago and we were still in the 150 to 175 billion. In the last 5 years, it's 250 billion. Like we're raising fast and we're doing nothing about it.
Doug, you got something?
So, we the first time I came face to face with some of this trafficking problem was in the early 2000s. We were working in Western Nepal, and the nature of what we were dealing with there was debt bondage, and it was very local and very specific, and it was multi-generational. And so we began to tackle that problem, and then Nepal outlawed slavery, and so that sort of went away, but really you still ended up having people engaged in indentured servitude. But as that decade progressed, then we watched it begin to change from debt bondage and forced labor to ever increasing sex trafficking across international borders. And I think I've got a question for Alana, which is, as we think about tackling the different aspects of trafficking, how do you silo the solutions? Because the solution, the forced labor solution may be different than the sex trafficking solution, which may be radically different from how you deal with sex trafficking on the digital front, right? So how you protect and counteract somebody who's running an OnlyFans oriented trafficking organization versus organized criminal gang in Orange County that's running massage parlors and a prostitution ring. I think feels like they're going to be different solutions.
Alana, what do you think?
I mean, I think the biggest thing I've found when I'm talking to different people, I can speak to somebody here in California, for example, and I can speak to somebody somewhere in the Midwest, and the same problem, they've got two very different solutions or two very different ideas of why it's happening in the first place. For example, I spoke to an AG in the Midwest, I won't say where, but They felt like the solution was to just get rid of all the traffickers, and then that would be it. If we just get rid of all the traffickers, there won't be any more issues. But understanding that supply demand situation and fully, I get there's a lot of it that can be very simple laws. For example, minimum wage, fines for we can work with that. But America is a different breed, being that a lot of people want to come here and they're happy to take that lower salary to be able to be here, to be able to be working. So we're in a bit of a gray area there. I think there can be stronger laws, labor laws around that to be able to protect people so they aren't exploited. But and then trafficking is, again, it's back to the education side of it. But I've spoke to many traffickers, a lot of them ex-drug traffickers who went into the human trafficking world, for exactly what you said, that first of all, the chances of getting caught are a lot less. Second of all, it's a reusable commodity. And that was exactly how they would describe it. These weren't people. These were just something that we can make money off of. And then I think we can also find that mindset when we're thinking about the rest of the world. We hear about it in war, and when we're talking about places in Africa, we don't see them as people. We're seeing them in a different way. When Afghanistan broke out, people used to be like, just bomb the place, does it matter? It's like, no, yeah, it does. These are people. Like, we can't just be like killing groups of people. So I think there's so much that we want to work on that might be about laws, it might be about policy, that might be about getting the UN to kind of wake up and tighten things up. But a lot of it's about humanity as well, and just how can we get back to a world where we love our fellow man and we don't treat them in that way. There's that 360 approach that we can work on the policy, we can do this, we can do task force rescues, we can do all these things, but until we get to understanding that everybody's important and everybody matters, I think it's still a hard road. And then we can go even deeper into, when obviously my main area is working in sex trafficking, but a lot of the things we see is just this kind of desensitization to what love is and what sex is, and it just becomes this whole dirty mess because we're not really teaching that anymore. And then it goes back to family breakdown and community breakdown, and all these things contribute to the area. So it is very, very huge. And then what you said as well about the people that are having to see these things every day, the cops who are having to go through 8,000 CSAM images in a day and then just go back to their family life and their daily life as normal. Like, we can't have that. These people need to be getting trauma care and help and mental health help that doesn't involve just going to the pub. So I firmly believe we can't do it with one solution. It needs to be a whole 360 approach.
This it brings up a question in my mind, and then I got a question from the Instagram side here too, is that it really, to silo it off to begin with seems like a smart play, right? If you got to work on this side and they all have different solutions, but at the same time, by siloing them, by separating the different styles of exploitation, it separates the overall reduction of demand, really, right? Because you're only working one area, makes it even more challenging in my mind. Now, the question I have from the Instagram side was Dave Kervin jumped in here. He said, for any panel member, do you find that that's where a majority of the problem lies in fighting trafficking, in the low conviction rate? Do you find that that's, here we go. In Canada, we seem to have a rather soft on crime judicial system that ends up putting repeat offenders or criminals back out on the street sooner than they should be, which is certainly a challenge for law enforcement to face. Do you guys see that as well? Doug, I'm going to come right to you. What do you think?
I think low conviction probably is part of it, but I think Alana touched on it earlier, which is the lack of commitment to getting at root cause, an understanding of the roots of what drives people into this. It's, if you think about chasing the drug game, counter narcotics over the years, they focused on trying to put traffickers in jail, and they focused on trying to burn fields, and they never dealt with the demand side. And then I think that's exacerbated by, on the consumer side, the lack of clarity of understanding what is trafficking. I think that somebody, as Alana mentioned, talking to a soldier who had purchased, sexual services overseas, would have said they would never have done it if they'd known it was a trafficked victim, but the likelihood of it being a trafficked victim was high. So how do you, on that educational side, get people to understand that really, focus on demand reduction is going to be as an important part of it. But understanding the root cause analysis and how do you tackle the economic issues that are at the root of driving people into these is I think more important than the low conviction rate, in my opinion.
Yeah, makes sense. Alana, you got any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think that the low conviction rate from across the board, I think, is just lack of knowledge. So when you're speaking with police officers, sometimes it's very difficult for them to determine. I have a training course for officers, and when you speak to them at the start to the end, like, it's completely different to what they thought trafficking was or what they were looking for. But not only that, prosecutors and judges are very, very confused about what is trafficking, what does it look like, how do we know that this is it, and the means act purpose, the mens rea, it's very difficult for them to work out what it is if it's not immediately in your face as to. And we had so many years of convicting prostitution, and the buyers were getting away with it, or we weren't looking into who the sellers were. Really, we were just putting women behind bars for crimes that they should absolutely never have been behind bars for. But and then the different wording of what it is, I think we used to have like slave ships that would cross over from Africa, but similar ships would cross over from Scotland or Ireland, but we would just call it indentured servitude instead of slavery. But we're looking at the same thing. We're just putting it into different perspectives. So I think that is a point as well, is that we're very, very good at dividing things and making them about race or sex or religion or socioeconomic backgrounds when we should be looking at as an overall whole thing that can be tackled. I also think that I go back to this all the time, but pulling people together, collaborative efforts and groups of people. In Scotland, we've got the cross-party group, which really made a huge difference. Scotland's only tiny, but we really did make a huge difference in trafficking when we were pulling, I believe it was like once a month, once a quarter, and then we do an annual event where we would bring teachers, police officers, just everybody that might be involved in these things, Chamber of Commerce, whatever it might be, they would come together and everybody would share their thoughts and ideas, because what one person's thinking will be different to the others. But once it all comes together and we work together to find solutions, that can work too.
Yeah, that's the basis of the collective at the very beginning of it, was to do that. Sean, you got any thoughts on any of this? If he can get his mute button to work. He's on the hot seat.
Sorry, I could jump in real quick.
Sorry, my mute button was getting all kinds of crazy there. So what I'd like to propose is two different worlds. The old world and the new world. The new world that we exist in right now of human trafficking versus just a few years ago, which was the old world of human trafficking. And I know that's a really big statement, a really broad statement, but I'll stand by it because, as I'm about to explain, there are two different worlds. The old world of human trafficking was easier to understand and easier to some degree to control than the new world that we're entering into in human trafficking, the digital world of human trafficking. So most people aren't familiar with the dark web. Most people don't understand how cryptocurrency is actually being used. Most people don't understand how online recruitment works, online grooming works, online a lot of things work. This new world that I'm about to describe through a case study should kind of open your eyes to two different worlds of human trafficking. Because the human trafficking that I'm about to describe, this new form of human trafficking, is relatively new, like just a decade-ish old. So what I'm talking about is cyber crime or cyber human trafficking. And I'll give you some examples. This case study is a location in Myanmar. And it came onto my radar when Doreen and I were in Thailand at the end of last year, doing some traveling. She was doing a running event out there, but we were in Chiang Mai, very close to the Myanmar border. And so I talked with some locals, Thai locals, about what's going on in Myanmar, and I kind of got a little bit of insight that sparked some curiosity. So here to a case study. There's an area in Myanmar called Shui Koko, and it is a new city. And this new city is a massive city. And you can think of it as a massive industrial park. It was set up in a special exclusion zone that has certain reductions in sort of law and order. It enables certain tax advantages, and it allows certain warlords to do whatever the heck they want. And so this location started off, generally speaking, in 2019 is when it first started getting built. And I'm going to give you some details now. It's going to take me a couple of minutes, but I think it's an important establishing case. So this new city called Shui Koko was funded by a Chinese-owned company called Yatai International Holding Group, the primary international developer for this quote-unquote new city project. They did this in cahoots with an individual called Colonel Saw Chit Thu and his Karen Border Guard Force, Unit 1022. They are nominally a Myanmar military command, but they are operating with significant autonomy in the particular area of this new special exclusion zone. So we've got a warlord, loosely speaking, that is aligned with a Chinese-owned company that is funding all of this publicly. Now, to the main point. So it's financed by China opaquely. The profits initially were to focus on gambling, but pretty quickly during the COVID lockdown, what they found was they could start designing scam centers. The scam is generally called pig butchering. And pig butchering should kind of give you a visual representation of what is going on online. You're the pig, and you're about to be butchered over a period of time. What happens in these scam centers, which, by the way, started off small, of course, but now have tens of thousands of people trapped in servitude in this one Shui Koko, in this one location, of which there are many locations spread across Laos, Cambodia, and Myanmar. So Shui Koko is being run by a transnational organized crime syndicate as the core operators, and the local Myanmar special exclusion zone, we'll call it a warlord, is enabling all of this because the government of Myanmar chooses not to step in. So we've got massive profits that are untraceable through cryptocurrency and the dark web. The profits are so immense that the scale of the operation only continues to magnify in numbers. How do they get their numbers? How do they get people into these centers? Well, there is a recruiting campaign online, and it is job offers. It is job offers to come and work in IT, in high-level IT, or in human resource departments, or in travel areas, organizations, industry. These are put out as generally appealing ads that you or I or anyone in North America would look at and think, I wouldn't mind spending half a year in Myanmar, doing a little bit of traveling, seeing the world. The moment that you arrive, there is a process. Typically, you land in Thailand for the Myanmar exploitation. You land in Thailand, and then someone will meet you there. Congratulations, you're going to be working in IT. Let's get on the bus. We're going to drive to the new office. Well, you illegally cross a border. and then you're screwed because you go straight into the compound, your passport is taken away from you, and then you're told you now owe us, and it depends. These are countless reports from countless victims. The amount is anywhere from 10 to 20,000 US dollars that you now owe for the quote unquote transport that you will never be able to pay back. Your working hours are anywhere from 12 to 18 hours per day, 7 days per week, and you have quotas that you have to deliver on. I'll get to what happens if you don't deliver on your quota in a sec. But your quotas are this: targets. You are now in a scam farm that is pig butchering the rest of the world, and you are setting up either people that you knew or people in your country that you were familiar with to have them believe that you are there to help them invest in something, or you're there to, can you just send me a photo of your kid, or whatever the case is, to inject their way into your life to then somehow exploit money from you. Now, if once you're in the scam center, you're not meeting your quotas, that's when things get really terrible, like to the point of horrific. I'm not going to describe the horrific stories that I read about if you're not meeting your quotas in this specific farm, but suffice to say, it involves torture. It involves you as a person who's trapped in the operating center having to torture another person who isn't performing as well as you are. And so there is this structure in place, this criminal structure that has no sense of human decency and are only focused on creating profit for a transnational crime syndicate at the total expense of the tens of thousands of people just in that one location. Now, does it get worse? Yeah, it sure does. Because if you're not meeting your quotas, and if after a while you've tortured your other co-workers who aren't performing as well as you are, eventually you get sold off to the next scam center, which will then put you through that process. And you are moved, as I said earlier, as a renewable resource. You are now cattle that will be moved from center to center to center with no other value to the transnational crime syndicate other than profit. And so it is a life of servitude that isn't just now you've got to work for the rest of your life. It's appalling working conditions with horrific outcomes. And so this is a new form of human trafficking that barely existed in 2019. But during the lockdown of COVID, these transnational crime syndicates realized that particularly North America was vulnerable, particularly children were vulnerable because they were so online during the lockdown that these transnational crime syndicates started exploiting the onlineness of that period of lockdown. And here we are today, where the bank account realizations have been taken to such a degree that it's unstoppable. These organizations are going to exploit it for all it's worth until the end of time.
Yeah. I don't even know where to go with that, but Doug?
Well, I think it's interesting too that because a lot of folks think that it would be mostly Burmese that would be in that city, but it's actually a lot of East Africans, it's a lot of Indians, it's a lot of Filipinos, right? They've trafficked folks to that location in order to engage them in this criminal enterprise designed to fleece people out of their funds, right? The pig butchering that you talked about. And they've got some unique tools that they use to provide that coercion as well that are very horrific.
Now, Doug, I know you got a hard time in here right away that you got to take off for, but I'd if you want to give any final thoughts, anything before you jump off.
Well, I'll be rejoining in a bit, so I'll save my final thoughts for that point.
Okay, cool. Well, then we'll see see you in a few minutes. Alana, any thoughts on anything so far?
Yeah, thank you for that, Sean. It was something I'd actually not heard of. I've heard of this in India, and I've heard of it in Nigeria, but not there. So that's a really interesting one, and how it works. And unfortunately, as I say, yeah, it just comes down to the evolution thing, doesn't it? It's we need to try and keep up with them. And the scamming side of it is they're so very, very good at it. They teach them exactly how to. I've a number of clients who have been scammed out of millions of dollars. And some of their methods are just, I mean, it's very interesting when I speak to clients. The first thing is they're very embarrassed by what's happened and what they've done, or how they've handed this money over to a person, or how they've been brought in, but they are very sophisticated in what they do. Some of it's not trafficking, some of it's just call centers that are set up in order to scam people, and people work there legitimately and receive bonuses for what they do. But the other side of that, the awful side of it, is some of these centers are targeting kids on the other side, and getting them to send images, or getting them to admit to maybe gay thoughts or things that would maybe embarrass them or embarrass their family, and then the sextortion begins. And I believe, and my stats might not be right on this, I believe we had 12 suicides in the US last year from sextortion. Just young kids just not knowing what to do after this happened. So there's both sides of it. It's pretty bad.
I think the analogy of old world, new world that you use, Sean, is interesting. The old world of it hasn't gone away, but the growth drivers, that rapid scaling from an economic perspective that Alana mentioned, from 140 billion to 250 billion over the last 7-8 years, that's really being driven by this new world order. So there's still kids being trafficked from Western Nepal into India in order to become sex slaves. That stuff is still happening, but the real economic drivers are being driven by this new digital wave.
And what is interesting is, so I tried to create two separate silos, old world, new world, but as we all know, they're very interweaved. And so what we have now is this new exploitation tool through dark web, cryptocurrency, pig butchering, scam farms. They are out there. They've got their tentacles out into the digital space, into typically two areas. One area is to gather the most amount of wealth, and then the other area is to gather the most amount of people. And so they will be spreading their tentacles into exploit people to get them into the country, into the scam farms. So, maybe it's someone in Europe who just wants a trip, and they head over there, bam, now they're in a scam center and they can't leave. They're stuck. Their passport's gone. They're under the baton. And so that is one form of exploitation. But the other one, of course, is the exploitation into another country where that exploited person will be used as a resource to then further exploit into a deeper layer of within their family or within their neighborhood. And so the initial digital exploit is then exploited further to create layers of exploitation that the initial person who's exploited feels like they can't back out of. But whether they can back out or not isn't my point. My point is that it is rarely ever just a one and done exploitation. It is a multi-layered exploitation that the scam farms, the new digital human trafficking, is sophisticated enough that the scripts that they will read or type into the exploited person's life is sophisticated enough that they are now digging into different layers of that person's life to exploit with new scripts. And so it doesn't stay, reach out and maybe exploit a person. It is reach out and exploit a web of interactive people. However many people you know are about to get exploited based on that first contact. And so it's a different form of human trafficking. The old, I'll call it the old world, is still exploited. The new world is definitely being exploited, but the two worlds are co-joined. And so this new digital exploitation is taking the old tricks and the old tools and using them within a new world. So it is almost like a little bit bad with this new form of human trafficking.
Yeah. It reminds me a lot of a viral pathogen in that it considerably, like, it'll consume the host entirely before moving on to the next one. And it's not just a one and done thing. This is crazy. Alana, you got any thoughts?
Yeah, and I think we could go as deep or as long into exploitation and how people can be exploited and all the different things. I think what I also like to talk about is just like, what can you do? Because it's so huge and it's so vast that it can sometimes consume your own mind, is to say, like, how do we fix this? It's so big. But I always say it just starts on your own doorstep. You know, are you, I live in an area of California that has a high Central South American population that provide most of the services, you know, so your gardeners, your housekeepers, your nannies, all these types of roles are provided by people that have come over here to do it. So they're willing to work, they're willing to possibly take lower amounts of money because they might not have papers, or there might be situations like that. And I think that's on us to recognize it and not fuel it, because it might not seem that much of a big deal to you to say, well, I'm going to pay somebody $100 a day to clean my whole entire house that they're here for 10 hours cleaning. And that seems like you're getting a good deal, so I'm going to take it. But it comes back to that personal responsibility to say, well, how do you want to make the world a better place if you're enabling that system that you believe shouldn't exist? So you're getting a good deal. Well, how about we actually pay people properly, so they're actually, the ability to exploit isn't going to be that easy if everybody's open to actually being fair with people. You know, if you go into a nail salon and you're able to get a full set of acrylic nails for $20, like, do the maths. Like, does that work? Does it work for that person? Is there a way that person's getting a fair wage? You're maybe getting a deal, but at what cost? Is your car getting cleaned for $10 when they're cleaning it for an hour? How does everybody benefit from that? So I always say, when people say, like, what can I do about it? Because they're like, what can I do about this huge mass thing that's going on? Well, just start on your own doorstep and use your own, you search your own soul. Is this right, what I'm doing? Everybody loves to get a deal. Don't get me wrong. When I'm down the car showroom, I'm negotiating like the best of them. But when this is a person we're dealing with that is not getting a fair shot, you've got a responsibility, I believe.
I totally agree. And I think I love the fact that we're bringing this back to the demand, because that is really where it comes from. If there is no demand for these services, for these items, for these things, for the profit that it'll bring, then the profit will diminish as the demand diminishes, right? If people don't want to buy it, then they're not going to get it. I remember back in the 80s, and this is not a great example of this, but back in the 80s, 90s, when you'd get like a stereo off the back of a truck, and it seems like, well, there's no victim here. It's just one corporation or it's whatever. But the victims are down the chain. They're not immediately seen. But because there's a demand there, people want the cheap goods. They want the easy labor. They want the stem cells. Like, these are it's the easiest way to do it is to exploit other people, I think, and that's where it kicks in so quickly. And I just want to touch on these. I got a couple comments here, and then Sean, I want to get your thoughts. Is Paradoxia jumped in here and said, "Thank you for bringing this to light, Sean." Dave Kerwin said, "As a parent, I really appreciate all this information. Thank you." And then he jumps in and says, correction, not only as a parent, but as a humanitarian that cares about the well-being of others, which is excellent. Octavian jumped in here and said, I have to go, but wanted to say tough issue, exquisitely tackled. Can't wait to watch the rest of the recording later today. And then on the Instagram side, Paradoxia says, filling a void that can't be filled, which is interesting. I had this thought earlier, but Sean, you got any points on any of this?
I do. So I'm going to cut right to it because we're talking about how can we do something about it. And as Alana said, and I agree with her, it starts on your own front doorstep. So she had used an example of, cleaning your house, 10 hours for $100, which of course is a redonkulous deal. There's something wrong with that. And so the difference is here that you can look at that as a transactional occurrence from human to human where you just want something as cheap as possible, or you can treat it as a human moment where you can say, hey, listen, tell me a little bit more about yourself. I want to get to know you. I want to understand why you're doing it for so cheap. And so that getting to know another person is the first step in making it a more human aspect rather than a transactional aspect. Because if someone steps up on your front doorstep and says, hey, I'll clean your house for $100, I'll be here for 10 hours. If you say yes, not only are you perhaps exacerbating the problem, but now you've got a problem in your house of someone's walking around your house, eyeballing, maybe the photos of your kids on the wall, taking photos of those, and days, weeks, months later, now this is a new way for people to get into your life from a scam farm that is about to pig butcher you. And so the layers of complicit actions are as deep as you want to consider them. And so if you simply accept the deal without any thought, that's just careless. Anyone can take a moment just to ask a few questions, get to know the person in front of them a little bit more, better understand whether this is a good idea or not. And through that process, I think the humanizing aspect is critical to kind of stopping these sort of things. It isn't ever going to make it go away, but at least it will start to slow it down, perhaps.
Alana, I want to ask you this question because you brought this up a little bit earlier, and it was in regards to things being allowed due to freedom of speech. And I think a lot of these things are, as you said earlier, the freedom to engage in the development of these things, in the grooming aspects of it. Similar, Sean, with these setups, getting people there is not illegal. It's once they hold them there that it becomes a problem, and then there's already a problem there, right? And so I'm wondering how much freedom plays into this, in the fact that we live in such a free and open society, and digitization has just opened up the rest of the world to people. I wonder how much that plays into it. You got any thoughts on that, Alana?
Yeah, I think we've got so many crimes right now. We just look at wrongful act, wrongful mind. Like what is it that they've done, and what were they planning on doing? Were they deliberate? Was it murder? Was it manslaughter? We've got these ways of honing down on it. If you've got somebody who is deliberately targeting a person, selecting them because of a specific demographic or background or situation, manipulating them into falling in love or going for a job or whatever it might be that the manipulation is, secluding them, isolating them, breaking that down, that to me is wrongful mind, wrongful act. You're doing something with a deliberate aim of exploiting them. But in 48 states, for example, there's zero crime involved with doing that to a child, for example. If you do this process, as long as there's nothing sexual about it yet, there's no crime. And how do you prove that? It comes down to that. How do we prove that somebody is trying to take control of somebody? How do we prove that somebody is planning on manipulating? It might not be that you can get them the first time, but if we can establish pattern, if we can establish that they've done this before. If I take an example, I had someone the other day who he came to me and he said, Alana, I don't know if this is a problem. I don't know what I'm looking at here. I've got a person who's been contacting my 14-year-old son. I'm not sure if I should be concerned. I said, well, send me what you've got. He sent it to me, and 1000% it was a concern. But at first look, you wouldn't be sure if this was a concern. There was nothing sexual about it. There was nothing direct about let's meet, there was nothing in that. But it was, trust me, you tell me, you don't, I won't tell him if you tell me, like, you can tell me, like, keeping that secrecy, building that bond, excluding people. I'm the only one who'll understand these types of tiny little things. As soon as I read it, I knew this was a predator that needed to be watched out for. Now, what could happen now is the father's going to say, well, stop, we'll put a halt to this. He could contact the police. The police probably can't do anything about it because nothing's gone further. All that person is now going to do is just move on to the next child that might not have such diligent parents. But if we can make it a crime, if he was to report that, then when they move on to the next child, this is on the record that something's happened before that's been a concern. If we're now seeing this 2, 3, 4, 5 times down the line, that there's a pattern of this behavior. Right now, there's nothing could be done about it. If it was a crime, we could do something about that, because a lot of things are done based on what's happened. It's like, why can't we focus on stopping it happening in the first place? We do it with terrorism. If they're suspected of planning to blow up a building, we're going to put a stop to it. Well, how about we stop our children being harmed before it happens?
That's a tough one, and I mean, Sean and I, we've had shows on parenting before, and I think a lot of it has to do with just the general engagement of, like, the engagement of our children, like being able to be open and honest and have these discussions, so that when your kids will perhaps even bring this to you, like your
but even I think on the flip side of that is, with this particular one, and I see it all the time, they're not just grooming the child, they're grooming the parents, they're grooming the people that are around them. So they're making them fall in love with them as well. So similar to what this father was saying, he's like, they're a good person. I'm just confused about this. It was, something in his gut was telling him it wasn't right, but he didn't know quite what it was. And it was only because he knew me was to chat to me. Otherwise, sometimes we're a bit shy to say something, or you trust that person, they wouldn't harm them. They're very, like, predators and manipulators are very, very good at making everyone believe they're the good guy.
That's a great point. Sean, you got thoughts?
Yeah, so the crime, of course, is one thing, but the other crime is the unawareness, or the not telling our fellow man about this problem. And so good on you, Alana, for getting in there and having a cold eye review on the situation, which is, generally speaking, anyone who's going to listen to this later today, is precisely what you should be doing in your own life right now, is reevaluating some of these situations that perhaps your kids or you are involved in, getting a new cold eye review on your life and your relationships. And if you don't have the wherewithal to literally cold eye review your life, then find a friend who will. I'm not saying call Alana, because I don't want her to be swamped, but I mean, like, you need people in your life who can apply a critical eye with some experience and non-emotional judgment, and simply evaluate it for what it is, rather than people who are emotionally involved or not as educated in this subject won't pick up the patterns that perhaps Alana would. So I want to use the global trafficking to also sort of reflect on the within a city trafficking, or within your own little community trafficking. So back to the scam centers, and there are some obvious phases that are involved in this. So first up, the recruitment phase. And we'll call that the global lure, but in Alana's case, it could have been the county lure. And so you've got your recruitment phase. Victims are recruited through sophisticated online job advertisements promising high-paying positions in fields like IT support, customer service, human resources, or online marketing. These advertisements often target educated individuals and appear on legitimate job portals or social media, creating an illusion of authenticity. Victims are drawn from a wide range of countries across Asia, Africa, Latin America, and occasionally Europe and North America. That's the recruitment phase. The recruitment phase is as sophisticated as anything you can imagine. It is way more sophisticated than you believe. The ads that you would see that you might think, oh, I wouldn't mind doing that. Be cautious. So you've got your recruitment phase. Then you've got your transportation phase. And this could easily fall into Alana's story of, at some point, the individual who was involved with that young person would have had some form of transportation. Hey, let's meet up at a cafe. Hey, let's get together at the park. Hey, let's go to that birthday party. Hey, let's whatever. But that also applies globally. The transportation phase, the deceptive journey. Victims often travel legally to a transit country such as Thailand with visas sometimes arranged by the traffickers. From the transit country, they are then moved, often illicitly and under duress, overland to the heavily guarded compounds of Cambodia, Laos, or Myanmar. Upon arrival at the compound, victims' passports and mobile phones are typically confiscated. And so if we drill that down into more of a domestic situation with Alana's example, well, perhaps, someone meets up at a park somewhere and all of a sudden the individual is telling the young child, hey, listen, don't talk to anyone else on social media. In fact, just you and I, let's just DM back and forth, or let's create some new accounts for each other where only you and I are involved in this deceptive journey. Next phase is the exploitation phase, and that is forced criminality. And so, as an example, victims are forced to work extremely long hours, often 12 to 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, with few or no breaks. Their job is to perpetrate online scams following scripts and demanding daily or weekly financial quotas for defrauding targets. They are constantly monitored by armed guards and supervisors within the compounds. Now, how does that relate to Alana's story that she just relayed? Well, you can easily consider how the young person, the 14-year-old, can be exploited in this forced criminality. It could be, well, now you're working for me because I've got a photo of you. There's many ways that it can be done. But at some point, phase 3 is the criminality aspect. Phase 4, it's the control and coercion portion. We'll call it globally in the pig butchering scam centers, it is the coercion is done through extreme brutality or through some dehumanization. That same dehumanization could apply in Alana's story for a 14-year-old, of course. How does it work? How does the control and coercion work? I'm just going to rip through a few things here that you can build out in your own mind, or you can look into further later today. So here's some control and coercion aspects. You can have debt bondage. You can have physical violence or torture. You can have psychological torture. You can have confinement or surveillance. You can have you being sold as a victim through a bunch of different processes. And that doesn't mean that you're going to be moved physically. It just means that perhaps you can be abused financially through a variety of different means, which I'm sure you can use your imagination. Sexual violence, of course, is a way to control and to coerce. Medical neglect is a way to do it. Witnessing extreme brutality is a way to control another person. And forced participation in abuse, which is like so evil that you get coerced and extorted, and then you are used to coerce and extort someone else, becoming complicit in all of it and feeling like there is no way to get out of it. And so the 5th phase, of course, is the profit phase, and that is the gains for the criminal aspects, of which there are many ways to extort or gain profit from the circumstance, as it were. And so there are phases for transnational, and there are phases for right there in your own house, in your own community. And these phases are easy to understand once you step back and consider them, but they are impossible to see if you're right up in the thick of it, wondering if your son is about to be exploited by perhaps a new friend and you don't see the details, of course. So having someone with a cold eye review who can understand how these phases work, how the entire system kind of unfolds, is critical as far as I'm concerned.
This is it's a hard subject, but it made me think about the fact that even with all of the difficulties that you're describing there, Sean, is that even if you do physically escape, you're going to be psychologically trapped for years to come, and how much that's going to continually affect you throughout the rest of your life, even if you do physically escape. Alana, you got any thoughts on what Sean just dropped? Oh, you just got to unmute yourself there, Alana.
There we go.
There we go.
One of the last points that Sean said there about is making them do things to other people. It's a highly used to. I think one that I would probably add is threats to family. I don't know if you said it there, but that's a huge one that's used, especially for people coming across to the Middle East. That type of groups, their families are under great threat if they don't live up to what they're there for. But I know personally of people that have done exactly that and have become the traffickers to an extent themselves. And it's a personal preservation. We're not, you've been through so much. I want it to stop, so I'll get somebody else to do it. And this keeps this person happy. And it's horrific. And afterwards, it's very difficult to get past that. I've worked with people who have spent years in drug abuse, and because of the torture of what's actually gone through their life, of the things that they've had to do, not just for themselves, but that they've done to other people. And I feel like the things that they've done to other people hurts, or the trauma seems to sit a lot more. And I don't think there's a level. I was speaking to someone about this recently, that we can talk about violent sexual assault or these types of things that people picture as like the most horrific forms of trauma, but trauma can be in any level. Harming someone else, any kind of violation around your own personal soul, your mind, your body, all these things that can really, really stick with a person. And I think that it is a hugely underlooked part. And I think that there's a lot of things out there right now for things like veterans and first responders and people that have been through really, really horrific situations, but there's very little that does focus on people that have been through this type of exploitation.
Yeah. Sean, you got anything else?
I do. So, Alana, we've been throwing around some stats or statistics and some case studies and some phases and some information, but now I'm at a point in the podcast where I'm curious as to what we can do just here on the podcast. What is Alana doing? What do you see as a path forward, or what is your organization perhaps, what is your dream, as it were?
So first of all, something that you mentioned earlier, the communication aspect of it, we can all do that immediately. And what I'm here to say is that anytime I've done a guest speak, no matter how big or small, every single time without fail, someone's come and either self-identified or told me that something was happening with their child, or maybe even later they've contacted me and say, I went home and I spoke to my family and this is happening within my household. It's very rare that I speak to kids now who haven't been contacted online. Like very, very rarely do I speak to a child who hasn't had a DM from someone, or that they've been contacted privately by someone. A lot of parents will say to me, yeah, but it's okay because my kid doesn't have social media. Your kid has social media. I promise you, your kid has social media. If you don't know about it, it's because they're using their mate's phone, or they're using they will have it. I spoke to my daughter. She was on a podcast with me when she was 12, and she explains exactly how kids get access to it when their parents don't let them. So it's the communication. Talk to them all the time. Make them my daughter's been contacted through DMs on Instagram. She brings them straight to me. I deal with it. It's a thank you for bringing that to me. Now mom's going to deal with that. And that's it. She doesn't need to know anymore. She just needs to know that if someone comes to her, she can come to me straight away. If she accidentally messages them back or gets in, like, whatever they've done, make sure that this dialogue can stay open, calm, and you deal with it as the parent. And if you don't know how to deal with it, contact somebody like me or somebody that you might know that will be able to help. The other parts of it, they just learning more. I think, I'm my police training program where I believe right now the current training standards is like 2 hours of human trafficking training that a police officer has to do before he's out there. It's just not enough. They're not getting enough information on what to do. So my police training program gives them all that, including their own protection and mental health. The producer that I had that made it for me, when he came on day one to help make the program, he knew nothing about trafficking. It was, he knew about movies or whatever. I was at an event where he was with me recently and somebody asked what we'd done, and he literally reeled off what trafficking was, how you can spot the signs, what to do, how to approach, how trauma-informed care works. His knowledge was huge just through working on this program with us. So go out there and just educate yourself, find out pieces of information that might relate to you or that might relate wider, something that might interest you. All those things that I just said, just question. Doesn't that seem like a bit of a too good to be true deal? If you're in a salon, for example, let's just say you're getting your nails done and it costs $50, it's the normal price, but does that person look like they're fed? Does it look like there's beds in the back of the salon? Does it look like they have access to phones and breaks? When you pay, are you allowed to tip them directly? Are you allowed to pay directly? Is there someone that controls the money? I'm not saying to become an investigative detective all of a sudden, but just opening your eyes a little bit to what's happening around you. Well, as you say, we start from where we can help. There's people dealing with a bigger picture, yeah, but the more that we can work on the ground level to end this, I think that's how we can really start to tackle it. And I think that when it comes to the sex trafficking side of it, focusing on grooming and making grooming a crime, I'm working on the Grooming Accountability and Prevention Act, which is, if anybody's ever tried to pass a bill in America, you'll know how hard it is, but we're working on it and we're hopefully getting there. And the dream for me is to have collaborative efforts across all cities and countries that people work together and come together and share ideas and stop acting like it's a glory mission for one person to rescue a child and do the photo op. That we're not looking for photo ops. We're not looking for the special moments. We're looking to actually change the world.
I got so many thoughts here, but I want to touch on a couple of comments I got throughout you guys talking there. And right off the bat, Ethos and Eros Project jumped in here and said, that there is a specific trauma category for kids under 6, which I just realized that. And to your point, Alana, like, there are so many different levels of trauma and ways in which we can be traumatized in life that to say it is either A or B or C or D, it's hard to actually define any of those to begin with. Dan C jumped in here, said, I bought drive-through McDonald's breakfast for a young victim of early childhood trafficking who I had to arrest on a warrant once. I knew their story. I also knew they hadn't eaten in a while. Not hard to do with it. Brings up the thought of, like, just general humanization is what I'm hearing a lot from the basis of what we can do. Look at people as people. The server at I try to make a point of it, but I look in the eyes of everybody that I talk to. So when I have to go get Tim Hortons or something like that, I don't just skim through the drive-through. I actually see them as a human being. I thank them directly versus not. And I think just the basic level of humanity, it's almost lost nowadays, which is kind of hard. I got another comment here from Corbin Bobby. He jumped in and said, becoming a member of Trace Labs can assist you to learn how to protect your children and others. Can be found on CSI Linux. Corbin, if you want to hit me up with the links, I can put them directly into the show notes, and that way people can get on it directly. Sean, you got any other thoughts?
I do. So there are a number of Canadian North American, European, and global agencies, organizations, and private institutions that have a lot of data on this subject, have a lot of opinions on this subject. And so, no matter what we say in this podcast today, it should encourage you, or it should invoke this in you, wanting to know more, wanting to see more, wanting to find out more, wanting to see the facts of the matter. Because whatever we say in here, if I throw out there's 50 million people in servitude right now globally, don't believe me. Go find out for yourself. That's what I did for 10 hours this week, was research into the subject to better understand the myths and the realities on the subject of human trafficking. And so there are all kinds of sources out there that have data for you to absorb. But don't take my word for it. Go find it. Go find all of the institutions that have opinions or have facts on this subject. So one thing on the humanization aspect, that is one of the key criteria for controlling human trafficking, is the dehumanization of the individual. And to some degree, there's some similarities to the military or basic training in a sense. You are kind of dehumanized through that initial process. So anyone who's gone through boot camp and done all the push-ups, you have gone through a form of dehumanizing process in order to be rebuilt again. Now, the distinction here is that in human trafficking, you are dehumanized and you are never rebuilt. You are simply left in the thick of it. And so once you come out of that, if you ever come out of it, then what? What organizations are there to build you up? And so I didn't get to that point in my research where I found a number of different global or North American organizations that take victims of human trafficking and then reintegrate them back into what I would call generally a normal way of existing. That transition from, pig butchering someone for several years and then straight back into driving up to Tim Hortons and staring someone in the eye and say, hey, how are you doing? How is your day? Like, that's a massive leap that, could be an entire podcast. So I don't have the research on what institutions are currently focusing on reintegration. Does anyone have any idea on that?
Let's ask Alana. What do you got?
So on my last researches, one of the things that I really wanted to create as well was a degree in human trafficking. I think there's the only one that exists from what I know is in St Mary's in London. They have a trafficking and migration degree, but this is a subject that, when somebody said to me, I think they said I would need 15 modules. I was like, easy. I can build 15 modules very easily around that to understand the full level. When we speak about the 55 million victims, if we put it into another way of saying it, that's 1 in every 150 people in the world. So if you think about how many friends have you got on your Instagram, how many people you follow and how many followers do you have, if you think 1 in every 150, there's a stat there that might be showing up, and it might become a little bit closer at home if you look at it like that. The military point's a really, really good point, because when we're doing the healing programs, we do military healing programs and we do human trafficking healing programs. And the reason that I really started working in the healing side of it for trafficking, not just the restoration, not just the safe houses, this type of work, but the actual healing afterwards, I was finding the work that I was doing with veterans was so incredibly similar. It's childhood. Something's happened in the childhood. There's something going on there. As I think Dean might know the stats better, but I think it's like 75% of PTSD within the military is from childhood and not from the actual service time. So stuff's happening in childhood. Somebody's giving them this promise of a better life. A lot of the time, I know my dad, for example, it was jail or military. That was the kind of choice for him growing up. So this offer of a better life, and then you're into this world where you're doing things like, let's face it, not many people want to go out and kill people. Well, not many people want to go out and do what a traffic victim has to do. Then they're out there, they do whatever they have to do and whatever their war is, whether it's the trafficking war or whether it's the Afghanistan or whatever it might be. Then once you're rescued, once you're out of that, who's there to help you? What do? You've still got all these memories, all these traumas, all these things going on. Who's there to help you? So when we looked at them both, the similarities were incredible as to what a veteran who's struggling with PTS and a trafficking victim who's struggling with PTS is going through. So very incredibly similar. Another little point there, what you said about the gentleman who messaged in about McDonald's, that's really, really sweet. But the other side of it is, there's one of my friends tells a very, very good story specifically about McDonald's, where this victim was, parents had kicked them out. They were struggling. They had nothing. They ended up on a park bench, and this trafficker noticed that she never ate. So he started bringing her a McDonald's every day, and just slowly, well, why don't you come back to my place and sleep on my couch and you could eat it? And then, oh, actually, now you've been here for 2 weeks, it's time for you to start kind of paying your dues. And then it kind of built up from that. So, and I'm not saying don't offer someone a McDonald's if they're hungry, absolutely, or maybe something a bit healthier, but give them something to eat. But just knowing, like, possibly those types of things might be triggers for somebody too. And then finally, on the humanity, there's a wonderful friend of mine. She literally makes friends with every single one of her Uber drivers. I'm sure she could write a book on her Uber driver stories. It's incredible. But, she humanizes everybody that is around her for that exact reason. You don't know what they've gone through. One of her, I think he's now her chief marketing officer or something along those lines, but she met him through Uber. He turned out he'd been very high up in Google. Something had gone wrong in his house. He'd ended up working Uber, and now she's taken them in. So humanizing people and not thinking that they're just there to serve you. I mean, Uber's another horrifically paid organization. So finding that connection with people, because we have become a world where we're just not even, we're talking to Chat GPT more than we're talking to real people now. Yeah,
absolutely. Doug, you got any thoughts on anything so far?
Well, I with some of the folks that we work with in Western Nepal and Northern India, one of the challenges we found was if you shut off some of the trafficking pipelines, so to speak, you still had to find ways to provide economic benefits to the families. So the reintegration side, it was a problem, but trying to figure out how do you prevent them from reopening those pipelines along the way as well, and working with organizations that were willing to invest in creation of enterprises that provided economic benefits, so that you kept people out of that root cause that drew them there to begin with had to be put in place, or you were just going to break the cycle temporarily and not allow for kind of a wholesale new approach to be done with it.
Sean, you got anything?
No, because my brain is like cooked from all of the information. Yeah. I just need a timeout right now so I can absorb everything that's just being said for the last little, 90 minutes. I need a moment.
No worries. I got some comments I want to touch on then, just in the chat here. B Jordan 729 jumped in here earlier. He said, "Can't stick around, guys. We'll definitely get back to this. I want to know more." And that's exactly, I think, the key to the podcast here, is that all this information, is difficult as it is to go through and discuss. That's what I want to see. I want to see more people taking an interest in this and getting more information so they can be better prepared. I just think it's awesome. And then Paradoxy jumped in here, said, because this is new consciousness just being revealed, we don't cross paths with anyone for no reason. I think that's a good point as well. This is a particularly difficult thing to go through, but I wanted to come back to something that I have written down here on the other side, but was an awareness of consumer responsibility. So we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, in the fact of like understanding where what it is you're buying comes from, or whether or not the deal is too good to be true, or so on and so forth. But the actual responsibility of us as consumers to get industry to not use human labor. I was thinking, or not use perhaps indentured service and things like that. I was thinking more along the lines of the company Origin Maine, down in Maine. They make geese and so on and so forth, but they really push that it's local manufacturing, it's local farmers, local ingredients, all these things that they make their stuff with. How do we as citizenry, how do we as consumers really push for more practices like that? Doug, I'm going to come to you. What do you think?
I mean, in my opinion, you've got to start with yourself and your own patterns of behavior and activities. Are you making the right choices for yourself? I think, understanding how and where you're sourcing stuff from becomes key, and working with increasing awareness and knowledge among others on the same issues. I talk with my daughters, for example, about their concepts of how they rationalize when they buy something from Shein or Temu or something like that. Are they aware of the roots of that? And what does that mean? Credit card companies. How do we hold credit card companies accountable to their support and involvement in trafficking? Because so much of the internet is running on credit card. What happens then if more of it shifts to crypto, and how we get involved with that? I think it's engaging with lawmakers to work on regulatory issues. Not that I'm a fan of more regulation, but that there is a role for that, particularly as Alana talked about at the beginning of this. It needs to be a more collaborative effort across the board, and that includes getting business and lawmakers engaged with the citizenry in combating it and knowing who ultimately is funding it. We expect businesses to engage in KYC practices so that they know who they're doing business with, so that the funds that they're expending aren't going towards narcotics trafficking or terrorist activities or sanctioned organizations in Russia. Why wouldn't we expect folks at an individual level to have the same responsibility?
That's a great point. Alana, you got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I love the point about Shein, and it was something that me and my daughter, one of the things that we do is we watch Law and Order SVU. That's our fun thing to kind of do together, and then we'll break down the episode and go through each thing. So what could be done better, what could be done differently. And she's 13 now, and her dream job is to be Olivia Benson. That's just her life goals, really. But we spoke about Shein very early on because all her friends were buying from Shein constantly, all these things. And I used Law and Order as an example, and we would sit down and we would talk about what this is. And, now she's like, I wouldn't touch that. I look at my great auntie Molly, who my daughter's obviously named after, but I remember when she died, after we cleared out her house, her wardrobe was kind of like, tiny little wardrobe. She had like 3 pairs of trousers, a couple of winter sweaters, a couple of summer sweaters, a nice, wedding outfit dress, summer dress, a couple of pairs of shoes. It all fit in this wardrobe, and she'd had them for years. She never bulk buyed, went out and overspent. She had exactly what she needed. She lived a beautiful life. She traveled the world. Really incredible human being, but she had everything she needed, but no excess. Even when it came to food and things, she ate exactly what she needed and no more, no less. That was her way of being. And I think that this, the consumer, and Doug, I'm sure, could speak on this a lot on the psychological side of it, but the consumerism that we're in today was created deliberately. It was a psychological warfare to make us want more. We want more of absolutely everything. And it's made us into this type of people that are just constantly buying and constantly needing, and nothing's fulfilling us. And no matter how much of it we get, we want more and more and more. What can we do differently? I mean, think just starting with maybe little things. Like, I would love to do Amazon free month. I think Jeff Bezos might take me out, but if we could do you really need to buy that product? Think about it for a little bit. Leave it in the cart for 24 hours. And if you still want it, maybe buy it then. But it's so easy to buy things now. It's so easy to be constantly consuming food, TV. We wait for nothing anymore. And do you not remember that feeling of waiting? It was such a great thing to save up for something, or wait for the next episode of the TV show to come, or these things would bring us together. And all this constant need for it now is pulling us further apart.
It's funny you mentioned that. Doug, what do you got?
Well, it's the speed of the cycle that Sean mentioned earlier, right? How fast things are happening, and the ease with which we can click on something and just have it show up and have it be available to us. There's no there's no pleasure in denial anymore, right? There's that delayed gratification seems to have been whittled away, and I think that feeds directly into these models that support the trafficking organizations and the product that the traffickers are pushing.
Sean and I had a conversation at one point in time on a show, and it was like convenience is poison or something like that we were talking about, and how by making things easy or more efficient, we're actually slowly poisoning ourselves through a lack of effort in order to get it. And Alana, I think it's hilarious. I do the same thing with Amazon. I'll put something in there and then I'll leave it for 3 or 4 days. And if I still still want it or still need it, then I'll get it after that point. But I do like the idea of, we talk about on the show regularly, it's a little bit of discipline in anything that you're doing. You take a little bit of extra time to understand who's perhaps serving you, or as we said earlier, if you have a gardener or a house cleaner or something like that, to actually take the time to know who they are versus just accepting them as parts of our life. And we've had culturally, let's say in the Western world, we've had this concept of abundance because we've had abundance for so long. And we have multiple generations growing up with consistent abundance. There is always seems to be more. And now that we've perhaps reached a level of exploitation, it just expands to the next level of exploitation, expands to the next level. As new technologies are evolved, new levels of exploitation are evolved. And I guess I have this quote here that I've always kept in my head, and it's from Stalin. And it was, you kill one person, it's murder. You kill 50 million, it's a statistic. And I'm wondering how much of the perhaps lack of acknowledgement within general citizenry comes from the fact that the numbers are so huge. The statistics are so large that people can't comprehend the vastness of these difficulties. What do you guys think? Alana, I'm going to come to you first.
Yeah, I fully agree. Until we humanize that, we can think about, like, if I was to say, I don't know the exact date. I think we're about 1,200 plus days of no education for girls in Afghanistan, for example. And it sounds like a statistic, a number that's awful, that's really horrible. But I have one particular girl I speak to quite regularly who's secretly been educating herself and doing various things. And when you speak to them, when you get to know that person and you know what they're going through and you know how awful it is, a life that they're living, it becomes real. But while we're just seeing it as this huge number, it doesn't feel that tough. When you're looking at the one person and you're hearing their voice and their emotion and their soul and everything that's going on inside them, then it's real. Saying 50 million slaves in the world, it doesn't feel like a real number, but it's a factual number.
Doug, you got any thoughts on that?
Only that we don't get to give up our responsibility just because it's hard. We don't get to give up our responsibility just because the numbers are so large that it's hard to wrap our minds around it. I remember talking with the kids about hard things as they were beginning to tackle a difficult project. And sometimes it doesn't matter where you start. It just matters that you start. And I think that applies here as well, is that, it may be impossible for us to wrap our mind around, $250 billion economic enterprise and that we can do something. But as Alana said, with her daughter no longer is willing to buy anything from Shein. And that's one person who's making a choice that benefits. And she does not get to say, well, just because 5 of my friends aren't doing it doesn't mean I don't have that responsibility to do the right moral and ethical thing. And so I think it really is just everybody has to come to grips with that themselves. And if they aren't willing to tackle the problem themselves individually, then they're abdicating their responsibility to their society.
Yeah, 100%. Sean, you got any thoughts?
Well, I like this idea because I got a little bit of hippie in me. And so let me explain that. I'm quite particular on what I purchase and how often I purchase things. And so as an example, this is really new to me. I bought this just at the end of last year from a small family operation in Chiang Mai. And it wasn't that expensive. It probably won't last that long because I'll probably abuse it, but I'll wear this until it's threadbare, until there's too many holes in it that my wife will be so irritated with me that I'll have to do something with it. I'll turn it into a bike rag or something like that. I don't know. But that'll be years down the road. And so if anyone's ever seen me out riding a bike in any videos that I put up on Instagram, you'll see me riding in stuff that is like sometimes 30 years old. I said to my wife not too long ago, I was winter riding, so I had a fleece on, a black fleece. It's a Patagonia fleece that I purchased nearly 25 years ago. Like the elbows are super thin and like it's not really serving its purpose anymore, other than I am so reluctant to buy new product just because. And that's why I'm on a 7-year-old laptop right now that is barely working, but I've got a new one on its way. And so I only ask for things from the world if the thing that I've got, for whatever reason, isn't working anymore. And so I've got t-shirts that I wear. I'll be wearing a t-shirt today that no doubt is about 15 years old or 25 years old. I just don't get rid of things just because. I don't feel like I need to buy something new to change my life. I can wear old stuff and change my life. And so I'm not a dude who feeds into the buy now mentality. I am not buying something this week to get rid of it next week. Whatever I purchase thoughtfully, and I hang on to it for a freaking long time. This camera that I've got right back here took me 4 years to purchase. I was shopping for a camera for 4 years. There is something really satisfying with the difference between needs and wants. I wanted a new camera, but I know what's good for Sean. It's when he's irritated because he wants something now, but he holds off as long as possible. And there's satisfaction in that waiting for something. There's satisfaction in it not arriving on your front doorstep 2 minutes from now. And so you can always tell if you really, really want something if you wait a really, really long time. And so inject a little bit more hippie into your life. You know, learn to live in the cotton that you're wearing right now for a few years rather than desperately seeking polyester tomorrow.
I think I would call that more homesteady than hippie, because I know some hippies that'll buy anything at any point in time, right? So, Doug, you had a thought earlier?
Nope, I'm good. I
right.
think it's just that individual responsibility to own your decisions.
100%. So we're almost at 2 hours here, and I have one more question for you guys, and then we can get some final thoughts here. Just kind of, I guess, generally looking at this topic of human trafficking, what is the one thing that you think isn't being engaged enough? Whether that be at a federal level, at a municipal level, as an individual level, what do you think is not being engaged enough in general with human trafficking? Doug, I'm going to come to you. What do you think?
I guess I go back and forth between two things. To me, it's the general education of how real the problem really is. But I alternate that with thinking that understanding root cause analysis of why people end up in that pipeline to begin with really hasn't been dealt with well.
Yeah. Alana, what about yourself?
Yeah, I agree with the point on education. I think our own human consciousness. I know that the subject is scary, and it's not something, and often people will tell me they don't want to hear about it because it is dark. Sometimes Dean will kind of pull me back because I'm talking about it too much at a party or something, but it is real and it is genuine. So just building on your own human consciousness and knowing what is right and what's wrong, and just having that awareness can really change. There was only, I guess, 10 years ago there were still taboos about mental health, and look at us now. If we could do the same thing with trafficking, we could have that same effect as to what we've seen with something like mental health.
Yeah, I love that. Sean, any thoughts on any of this?
Well, my thought is based on the panel. And so with Alana and Doug showing up to hit this topic, that's the kind of people that I like in my life. People who are doing their best for humanity rather than doing the best for themselves. So they are serving rather than self-serving. That's a really important distinction for me, because this topic is not something that anyone should step into lightly, thinking that they're about to make a buck. That is absolutely not what this subject is about. But you'll spend a few bucks by getting involved in it, and however much money you spend, either time or money, becoming better aware of human trafficking will pay itself back tenfold through the knowledge that you gain and how you can help others in the subject. As an example, for myself, over the last couple of hours, I've learned a ton. And before I started the podcast, I had to learn a ton. And so if not for Alana saying, hey, we should hit this subject, then it would be almost a void in my life that I was not completely unaware of, but I was quite unaware of. And now it has challenged me to consider, how can I be of greater help in this area? Not to make a buck on anyone, but to just genuinely help. And so that is probably the human element of this subject that isn't discussed often enough. It's a human problem that requires humans to solve the problem. Not corporations, not legislation, even though those things can do it. It requires literally a human like Alana saying, hey, guys, can we hit this topic? So the change, as trite as the saying is, the change begins with you. And I know it's an often overused statement, but literally in this case, the change started with Alana saying, hey, let's hit this. And here we are. I'm wiser for it. Whoever listens to this later will be wiser for it. But more importantly, hopefully, it will encourage anyone who's been checking it out to think a little more deeply about how they, as a human, can apply some more human element to this subject.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say thank you guys, both Alana and Doug. This has been a unbelievably educational show. Like Sean said, I have learned an absolute ton, and I just can't thank you guys enough, especially Alana for bringing this up and suggesting this gets brought to the world. And it has been needed to be discussed for quite a while, needs to be discussed for quite a while more as well. So we might have to set up a number, 2 or 3 sessions down the road so that we can really dive into some of the more detailed topics or subjects within this topic. There is a ton, but we are at almost 2 hours, and I just want to get some final thoughts on anything that we've talked about so far, all across the board. Alana, anything you got? Oh, what do you got, Sean?
And sorry, Alana, while you're doing your final thoughts, could you precede your final thoughts by just telling us a little bit more about the Blue Rose Foundation? Thanks.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Alana?
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate you tackling this subject. As I said, a lot of people find it and rightly so, it is a very difficult subject to talk about. And I think we've just done it very beautifully there without getting too deep into the dark underbelly of it. Blue Rose Foundation was set up simply for those reasons that I've talked about. I've been working in the area for almost 25 years, and it's my passions and my commitments and where I've gone have varied over the years. But I've worked with some very incredible people, and I've seen some of the very not so good people in the industry, like with any industry. So the Blue Rose was to bring together these people that are doing the good stuff right across the board. So as I say, there's a education and prevention element of it. There's task force, there's disaster response, which we can go into the ins and outs of how that matters another time. But there's a film and TV element to it. Greatest way to bring awareness, obviously, is to have people watch it. So we've got a couple of projects in the pipeline on that. And then the healing element of it, which is a huge part. And we have partners in every single one of them. So I'm 100% not doing it myself. I've got incredible people with us. So it's bluerose.foundation for anybody who wants to check it out. And if I'm always available if there's any questions, concerns. And as I say, your gut is normally telling you if something's not quite right, or if you're in a situation that you feel isn't quite right, or you're concerned, then I'm always available. I'm not always available. I'm actually never available, but I'll make space.
I'm glad you brought that. I'm glad you clarified that one. Doug, you got any final thoughts?
I'm in awe of the work that Alana's doing. Go check out Blue Rose. She's got some resources there for folks to learn more. There's a for folks that want to dig into it. There's also a 14 module course on the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime specifically on trafficking. So you can self modulate your path through this 14 module course to learn more about it. Education is so key to this, and the work that Alana and her team are doing is incredibly impactful. So I'm grateful for that.
Absolutely. And I got the link you sent me earlier here. I'll make sure that it's in the show notes for anybody that wants to hit that up. They can go directly from the link below later this afternoon. Sean, any final thoughts?
My final thoughts are this. We kind of started off covering the big subject, the complex subject of human trafficking, drilled right down to isolated cases, how it can impact someone domestically right within your own town, all the way through to transnational crime syndicates and how you can be exploited digitally through the dark web and cryptocurrency and all of that good stuff. And so we've kind of covered quite an array of areas, but I just want to bring it back to something that you do have control over, and that's yourself. Just try to do it better. Try to be a cooler human. Try to not look at the world transactionally, but try to look at the person in front of you that you are about to interact with and try to understand who they are before you start the transaction. And I think that by recognizing the person in front of you as a human who has struggles and how you may be able to help them, I think these kind of moments that we have constantly throughout our day, by reframing it as just try to be cooler to the people around you, I think some of these things can be reduced much more so than litigated.
Yeah. I don't have a lot to add. I wrote down this earlier, is that if you believe that you have principles, then you need to stand on them. You need to actually, if you think that, slavery is bad and human trafficking is a horrible thing, which I believe everybody should, then you shouldn't be buying your stuff on Temu. You shouldn't be there's little things, little principles that get eroded over time through ease, through convenience, through, oh, well, I'll just get it this one time, or, oh, it doesn't really matter right now. It absolutely does. And if you have principles, you need to stand on them, and you need to live that principle rather than just say that principle. So I just, again, can't thank you guys enough, Alana and Doug. Sean, this has been an unbelievable conversation. And as we all continue to learn, build, and grow, we'll see you all next week. Shimo. Thanks everybody for watching and being part of the collective. If this has sparked any thoughts or resonated with you, let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps us grow and keeps the conversation going. We'll see you all next time.